The first 72 hours after an atomic explosion are not measured by clocks. They are measured by silence, by ash falling from the sky, and by the absence of answers. What you are about to hear is not fiction, not speculation, and not imagination. It is a documented, real narrative drawn from survivor testimonies, medical reports, military records, and photographs taken in the immediate aftermath. As you listen, leave a comment sharing what thought or emotion this story awakens in you, because remembering only matters if we do it together. This story takes place in two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in the final days of the Second World War. If you believe stories like this should continue to be told, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write your comment as we move forward. At 8:15 in the morning, the sky above Hiroshima changed forever. A single flash, brighter than the sun, erased shadows into walls and human silhouettes into stone. Within seconds, the city collapsed into fire and debris. Temperatures at the center reached levels no human body could survive. Buildings vanished. Wood ignited instantly. Glass melted and flew like blades through the air. Those who survived the initial blast did not understand what had happened. There was no sound warning, no sirens, no approaching aircraft noise that lingered. Many believed a single bomb had fallen. Others thought the sun itself had exploded. Within minutes, a black rain began to fall. Thick drops, heavy with soot, dust, and radioactive particles, stained skin and clothing. Survivors drank from puddles, unaware they were ingesting poison. The air smelled of burned flesh, chemicals, and smoke. Breathing became painful. People emerged from the ruins, naked or half-clothed, skin hanging from their arms like torn fabric. Burns were not always immediately painful. Nerve endings had been destroyed. Some walked calmly, holding their own skin in their hands, not yet aware of the severity of their injuries. Hospitals were gone. Doctors were dead or wounded. Of the medical staff in Hiroshima, most were killed instantly. Those who remained worked without equipment, without medicine, without electricity. Bandages were made from torn clothing. Water was scarce. Morphine was almost non-existent. By nightfall of the first day, fires consumed what remained of the city. Thousands gathered near rivers, many falling into the water to cool their burns, never to rise again. The rivers became clogged with bodies, drifting silently beneath the smoke. No one understood radiation. People who appeared unharmed helped the wounded, carried bodies, searched for relatives. They did not know that invisible particles were already altering their blood, damaging their cells, sealing their fate days or weeks later. 70 kilometers away, military observers reported a new kind of destruction. Photographs showed a city flattened in a perfect circle. Messages were sent, analyzed, debated. Meanwhile, on the ground, survivors searched for names that would never answer. 2 days later, symptoms began to appear. Hair fell out in handfuls, gums bled. Purple spots formed under the skin. People who had escaped without burns suddenly collapsed. Doctors recorded confusion, vomiting, extreme fatigue. They did not know the cause. There was no word yet for radiation sickness. In Hiroshima, the second night was quieter than the first, not because the suffering had ended, but because fewer voices remained to cry out. The city glowed faintly under the moon, embers still burning where neighborhoods once stood. Then, 3 days after Hiroshima, another flash lit the sky over Nagasaki. Many believed it impossible. Survivors of the first blast could not comprehend that it had happened again. In Nagasaki, hills shielded some neighborhoods, sparing parts of the city from total destruction. But factories, homes, schools, and churches vanished in seconds. Once again, people wandered through ruins asking the same question over and over. What is this weapon? As the 72-hour mark approached, death no longer came only from burns or collapsed buildings. It came silently, internally, invisibly, and the world still did not fully understand what had been unleashed. And as rescue efforts struggled to begin, the survivors faced a future none of them could yet imagine, one that would unfold long after the fires went out and long after the ashes settled into the soil. By the morning of the fourth day, the cities no longer looked like places where life had existed. In Hiroshima, the outline of streets was visible only because rows of rubble hinted at where roads once ran. Landmarks used for navigation were gone. Survivors oriented themselves by distant hills, the only features unchanged by the blast. Search efforts were chaotic. Family members called names into empty spaces, listening for voices that never came back. Many stopped searching not because they found their loved ones, but because their bodies no longer allowed them to continue. Weakness set in suddenly. Legs trembled, vision blurred. People sat down and could not stand again. Temporary aid stations were established on the outskirts. Japanese Red Cross workers and surviving nurses treated hundreds with no understanding of what they were facing. Burns that initially seemed mild worsened dramatically. Skin blistered, darkened, and died. Wounds refused to heal. Infections spread rapidly in bodies already compromised. Children wandered alone. Many could not speak, either from shock or injury. Some held objects that once belonged to parents or siblings, refusing to let go. In Nagasaki, a small girl was found clutching a lunchbox, its contents fused into blackened metal. Her name was never recorded. By the fifth day, American reconnaissance planes flew overhead, photographing the devastation. From above, the destruction appeared almost clean, geometric, deceptively quiet. On the ground, the reality was overwhelming. The smell lingered everywhere, a mixture of smoke, rot, and chemicals that clung to clothing and skin. Survivors began dying in large numbers without visible wounds. Medical notes described sudden fevers, relentless diarrhea, internal bleeding. Blood counts dropped drastically. White blood cells vanished. Doctors could only observe and record. Treatment options did not exist. In Hiroshima, a doctor named Michihiko Hachiya kept a diary. He wrote of patients who spoke normally in the morning and were dead by evening. He wrote of his own symptoms: nausea, weakness, bleeding gums. Even as a physician, he did not know what was happening inside his body. Cremations became impossible to manage. Too many dead, too little fuel, too few hands. Bodies were buried in mass graves or left where they fell. Some families marked locations with stones, hoping to return later. Many never did. In Nagasaki, Christian communities were particularly affected. The Urakami Cathedral, once the largest church in East Asia, was destroyed instantly. Worshippers attending morning confession were vaporized. A bell remained standing, cracked but intact, later becoming a symbol of survival amid annihilation. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed the cities were cursed. Others thought the air itself was poisoned permanently. Many fled, carrying illness with them into surrounding villages. Local populations initially welcomed refugees, then grew fearful as newcomers began falling ill. By the sixth day, international discussions intensified. Scientists debated the long-term effects of this new weapon. Military leaders assessed strategic outcomes. None of these conversations reached the people lying on mats in makeshift shelters, watching their hair fall onto their blankets. Pregnant women feared for their unborn children. No one could say whether life growing inside them was safe or already damaged. Years later, these fears would be confirmed in heartbreaking ways. The sun rose and set over cities that no longer responded to time. Each hour blurred into the next. Pain became background noise. Hunger was constant. Water was precious. Hope was fragile. And as the seventh day approached, it became clear that survival did not mean safety. For many, it only meant that the suffering had entered a slower, more uncertain phase, one that would reveal its true cost in the days and years still ahead. As the first week unfolded, the pattern of survival became increasingly cruel. Those who had been strong enough to help others began to weaken. Those who had walked away from the blast without burns now filled the shelters, lying beside the visibly injured. In both cities, people started to understand that something unseen was killing them, but no one could explain what it was. Medical workers documented what they could. Tongues turned pale, then purple. Fevers surged without warning. Wounds reopened after seeming to heal. Simple scratches became fatal infections. The human body, stripped of its ability to defend itself, collapsed from within. Blood tests, when possible, showed catastrophic damage, though the meaning of those numbers was not yet understood. In Hiroshima, rain fell again, lighter this time, washing ash into rivers and wells. Survivors drank cautiously, some refusing water altogether out of fear. Dehydration became another silent killer. People argued over whether staying meant death or whether leaving meant spreading the sickness elsewhere. Trains slowly resumed limited service. Refugees packed into cars, many collapsing during the journey. Some died before reaching their destinations. Others arrived in rural towns where doctors, unfamiliar with the symptoms, misdiagnosed them as malnourished or psychologically traumatized. Few connected the illness to the explosion days earlier. In Nagasaki, the geography of the city created islands of survival. One neighborhood might appear relatively intact, while another nearby was reduced to scorched earth. This contrast intensified confusion. People asked why some lived and others vanished completely. There were no answers, only speculation and guilt. Photographers and journalists arrived under military supervision. Cameras captured skeletal buildings, twisted steel, and survivors staring directly into the lens with eyes that seemed older than their faces. Many of these images would not be published for years. What the world saw was carefully controlled. What the survivors lived could not be edited. By the 10th day, the number of deaths attributed to the bomb continued to rise sharply, even though no more explosions occurred. Doctors realized they were no longer counting casualties of a single event, but victims of an ongoing process. The weapon had not finished its work when the blast ended. In shelters, people compared symptoms. Hair loss became common. Some woke up to find their pillows covered in it. Others noticed dark bruises appearing without injury. Bleeding from the nose and mouth terrified everyone. Parents hid these signs from children, trying to preserve a sense of normalcy where none existed. Funeral rituals changed. There was little incense, little prayer, little time. Mourning became private, compressed, almost silent. The scale of loss overwhelmed tradition. Entire family lines disappeared in a single morning, leaving no one to remember them. In Hiroshima, a surviving schoolteacher wrote of her students all gone. She listed their names in a notebook, unsure who would ever read it. In Nagasaki, factory supervisors searched employment records, realizing that entire shifts had ceased to exist. The occupying forces began distributing limited information, acknowledging a new type of bomb, but offering no guidance for treatment. Radiation remained an abstract term, disconnected from lived reality. For the survivors, the damage was not theoretical. It was visible in every mirror and felt in every breath. And as days turned into weeks, it became clear that the first 72 hours were only the beginning. The cities had been destroyed in moments, but the human cost was unfolding slowly, relentlessly, shaping lives that continued, not in recovery, but in adaptation to a permanent wound. Con el paso de las semanas, la destrucción dejó de ser solo un paisaje y se convirtió en una condición permanente. En Hiroshima y Nagasaki, la vida no regresó, simplemente continuó entre ruinas. Los sobrevivientes despertaban cada día sin saber si su cuerpo respondería. Algunos lograban levantarse, otros no. La incertidumbre era total. Los médicos comenzaron a notar patrones más claros. Personas que parecían recuperarse sufrían recaídas severas. La fiebre regresaba con más fuerza. Las infecciones se volvían incontrolables. Pequeñas heridas sangraban durante horas. El sistema inmunológico había sido devastado, aunque ese término aún no se usaba con precisión. Se hablaba de una enfermedad extraña, algo diferente a todo lo visto antes. En los hospitales improvisados, el silencio era constante, no por falta de pacientes, sino porque muchos ya no tenían energía para hablar. Los gemidos eran bajos, contenidos. El dolor se vivía hacia adentro. Las enfermeras escribían notas breves, sabiendo que probablemente serían los últimos registros de esas personas. La discriminación comenzó a surgir. En pueblos cercanos, los sobrevivientes de las ciudades bombardeadas eran evitados. Se creía que podían contagiar la enfermedad. Algunos no encontraban trabajo, otros eran rechazados en alojamientos. El estigma se sumó al trauma físico y emocional. Los niños que sobrevivieron empezaron a mostrar señales alarmantes: crecimiento lento, fatiga constante, infecciones repetidas. Padres observaban con miedo, preguntándose si el daño era permanente. No había respuestas. Nadie podía decir qué efectos aparecerían meses o años después. En Nagasaki, sacerdotes y líderes comunitarios intentaron ofrecer consuelo espiritual. Las palabras, sin embargo, parecían insuficientes frente a la magnitud de la tragedia. Muchas personas dejaron de hacer preguntas religiosas. Otras se aferraron a la fe como único sostén posible. Equipos científicos extranjeros comenzaron a estudiar a los sobrevivientes. Tomaban muestras de sangre, hacían entrevistas, medían síntomas. Para algunos esto representaba esperanza. Para otros era una invasión dolorosa, un recordatorio constante de que sus cuerpos se habían convertido en objetos de estudio. Las cicatrices físicas se hicieron más visibles con el tiempo. Quemaduras profundas dejaron marcas permanentes. Algunos sobrevivientes evitaban espejos. Otros cubrían su piel incluso en verano. La identidad quedó marcada por el evento, imposible de separar de la experiencia vivida. A pesar de todo, surgieron gestos de solidaridad. Personas que apenas podían caminar compartían comida. Vecinos reconstruían chozas con materiales encontrados entre los escombros. La supervivencia se volvió colectiva, basada en pequeños actos de humanidad. Pero incluso en estos momentos, la amenaza seguía presente. Nuevos casos de enfermedad aparecían sin aviso. Muertes tardías recordaban a todos que el arma no había terminado su impacto. No era un recuerdo del pasado, sino una fuerza activa en el presente. Y mientras el mundo comenzaba a seguir adelante, los sobrevivientes comprendían que su historia no sería breve ni simple. Lo ocurrido en esos primeros días seguía escribiéndose en sus cuerpos, en sus familias y en las generaciones que aún no habían nacido. Con el paso de los meses, la vida en Hiroshima y Nagasaki adquirió una forma extraña, suspendida entre la reconstrucción y el duelo permanente. Nuevos edificios comenzaron a levantarse lentamente, pero el suelo seguía guardando restos humanos. En algunos lugares, al cavar para colocar cimientos, aparecían huesos, relojes detenidos, objetos cotidianos deformados por el calor extremo. Cada hallazgo recordaba que la ciudad estaba construida sobre una herida abierta. Los sobrevivientes empezaron a recibir un nombre. Fueron llamados hibakusha, personas afectadas por la explosión. El término no solo describía una condición médica, sino una identidad social cargada de dolor. Muchos ocultaban su pasado por miedo a la discriminación. Se temía que no pudieran tener hijos sanos, que fueran frágiles, que murieran jóvenes. El silencio se convirtió en una forma de protección. Los estudios médicos avanzaron lentamente. Se confirmó que la radiación había alterado la médula ósea, dañado órganos internos y aumentado el riesgo de leucemia y otros cánceres. Estas enfermedades no aparecían de inmediato. Llegaban años después, cuando algunos ya creían haber sobrevivido definitivamente. La explosión seguía matando a distancia, a través del tiempo. En las escuelas reconstruidas, los niños aprendían a escribir mientras cargaban historias imposibles para su edad. Algunos habían visto morir a sus padres. Otros no recordaban nada antes del destello de luz. Los maestros luchaban por enseñar un futuro en un lugar donde el pasado se negaba a desaparecer. En Nagasaki, las colinas que habían protegido ciertas zonas también crearon divisiones invisibles. Quienes habían sufrido menos daño físico a veces sentían culpa. Quienes lo habían perdido todo sentían resentimiento. La comunidad tuvo que aprender a convivir con distintas formas de supervivencia. Monumentos comenzaron a surgir, no como símbolos de victoria, sino como advertencias. Nombres fueron grabados en piedra, muchos sin edades, porque nadie sabía cuántos años tenían cuando murieron. Ceremonias silenciosas reemplazaron celebraciones. El recuerdo se volvió un deber. Algunos sobrevivientes decidieron hablar, viajaron, dieron testimonios, mostraron sus cicatrices. No buscaban compasión, sino comprensión. Explicaban que el arma no distinguía soldados de civiles, adultos de niños, culpables de inocentes. Explicaban que la destrucción no terminó cuando cesó el fuego. Otros nunca pudieron hablar. El trauma se manifestó en pesadillas, ansiedad, aislamiento. El sonido de un avión aún provocaba pánico. La luz intensa causaba miedo. El cuerpo recordaba incluso cuando la mente intentaba olvidar. A nivel internacional, el mundo debatía armas, estrategias y poder. En Hiroshima y Nagasaki, la conversación era más simple y más dura. ¿Cómo vivir un día más? ¿Cómo enterrar a otro ser querido? ¿Cómo aceptar que la supervivencia no siempre significaba sanación? Y mientras los años avanzaban, quedó claro que la verdadera dimensión de lo ocurrido no podía medirse solo en números o fechas. Estaba escrita en cuerpos envejecidos antes de tiempo, en familias marcadas por ausencias y en una pregunta que seguía sin respuesta definitiva. ¿Cómo algo así pudo ser posible? Esa pregunta, nacida en las primeras 72 horas, seguía resonando, esperando una reflexión que aún no había llegado a su fin. Con el paso de las décadas, Hiroshima y Nagasaki se transformaron en ciudades vivas, modernas, llenas de movimiento. A simple vista, ya no parecían escenarios de destrucción absoluta. Sin embargo, para quienes sobrevivieron, el pasado nunca quedó atrás. Vivía en el cuerpo, en la memoria y en cada aniversario que regresaba con una mezcla de silencio y dolor. Muchos hibakusha envejecieron con la sensación de estar viviendo tiempo prestado. Cada diagnóstico médico traía consigo el temor de que la radiación finalmente reclamara lo que había dejado pendiente. Algunos murieron sin saber si su enfermedad estaba relacionada con la bomba. Otros vivieron lo suficiente para ver reconocida oficialmente su condición, aunque ese reconocimiento llegó tarde para muchos. Los hijos y nietos de los sobrevivientes crecieron bajo una sombra invisible. Aunque la mayoría nació sana, el miedo a efectos genéticos persistió durante generaciones. Familias enteras cargaron con preguntas que la ciencia tardó décadas en responder, y algunas que aún siguen abiertas. La explosión no solo afectó a quienes estuvieron allí, sino también a quienes vinieron después. Los testimonios, antes silenciados, comenzaron a ocupar un lugar central. Sobrevivientes hablaron ante estudiantes, líderes mundiales y organismos internacionales. Sus voces, a veces frágiles, a veces firmes, describían no solo el momento del estallido, sino los días posteriores, cuando la confusión, la enfermedad y la soledad se volvieron más letales que las llamas. En los parques conmemorativos, miles de grullas de papel se acumularon como promesas de paz. Cada una representaba un deseo, una vida, una advertencia. No eran símbolos abstractos, sino respuestas humanas a una tragedia creada por manos humanas. La historia de las primeras 72 horas después de la explosión atómica no trata únicamente de destrucción, trata de lo que ocurre cuando la tecnología supera a la ética, cuando la guerra alcanza un punto sin retorno. Trata de personas comunes enfrentadas a lo impensable, sin preparación, sin protección, sin comprensión de lo que les estaba ocurriendo. Los registros médicos, las fotografías, los diarios y las voces de los sobrevivientes coinciden en algo esencial. El daño no fue inmediato ni limitado, fue progresivo, profundo y duradero. La bomba no terminó su trabajo cuando la nube se disipó. Continuó actuando dentro de los cuerpos, dentro de las comunidades, dentro de la historia. Hoy, cuando el mundo sigue conviviendo con armas capaces de repetir esa destrucción, Hiroshima y Nagasaki no existen solo como lugares geográficos, existen como advertencias vivas. No hablan de pasado, hablan de futuro. Recordar lo que ocurrió en esas primeras horas no es un ejercicio de nostalgia ni de culpa, sino de responsabilidad, porque mientras estas historias sigan siendo contadas, existe la posibilidad de que no se repitan, y esa posibilidad, nacida entre cenizas, dolor y silencio, es quizá la forma más profunda de supervivencia que dejaron quienes caminaron entre las ruinas y vivieron para contarlo.